All right, everyone, strap in. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into the whole Ted Bundy thing.
Oh, yeah, this will be a fascinating one.
You guys sent in some seriously interesting stuff, too.
For sure.
We've got an academic essay that's looking at Bundy through this rational choice theory lens, plus a bio straight from biography.com.
Okay.
And we've got an academic paper breaking down Bundy's own words, like how he tried to explain his crimes.
So it was always the most chilling, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the big question, I guess,
Yeah.
can we ever really get the mind of a serial killer? I mean, is that even possible?
It's the question that's always there, isn't it? Haunts criminologists, psychologists.
Yeah.
Honestly, anyone who tries to make sense of this kind of horror.
Totally. And look, we're not going to shy away from the tough stuff. We're going to look at the external factors.
The stuff that happened to him.
Right. But also how Bundy himself tried to justify what he did.
Like, by examining those justifications, maybe we can shed some light on that darkness.
Yeah, like what drove him? Okay, so let's start back at the beginning with Bundy's early life.
Okay.
So we're born in 46, and get this, he was raised thinking his grandparents were his parents,
Whoa.
and that his mom was his sister. He didn't find out the truth until much later.
That's wild. I mean, think about the impact of that kind of deception on his identity. How much does childhood really shape us, especially family stuff?
Right. And it's even more complex when you consider the essay says Bundy had a pretty normal childhood, like good in school, no major red flags.
Except for, oh yeah, the essay mentions this.
Yeah.
Fascination with knives at age 3.
That's creepy.
It really makes you think about that banality of evil concept, right?
Oh, yeah. Explain that one.
Like the idea that regular, everyday people can do monstrous things. But how do we separate a sign of something bad coming from just kid stuff? Tough question.
Super tough. Makes you think.
Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. Bundy graduates with a psych degree, works on a political campaign,
A psych degree, huh?
and even gets a recommendation from the governor. He was crafting this perfect life on the surface.
See, that's the insidious part of psychopathy, often, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the mask. Bundy was good at appearing normal, hiding that darkness underneath. Gives me chills.
Totally unsettling. But then a turning point, a really bad breakup with his college girlfriend, Diane Edwards.
And this is where things get really interesting, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Almost all of Bundy's victims looked like Edwards' attractive students, long dark hair. Bundy himself even talked about fixating on this idealized woman.
Whoa. This makes you wonder about obsession, right? Like how heartbreak can twist someone like that.
Absolutely. This is where personal experience, maybe some psychological vulnerability, how that can lead to violence, super complex.
For sure. Okay, let's get into the actual crimes, the timeline. Bundy confessed to 30 murders, but some experts think it could be way higher.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that too. Could be over 100 even.
Over 100, jeez. And some even think he might have started killing as a teenager.
Criminologist Matt DeLisi, he's put that theory out there. And you look at how Bundy's crimes escalated, got more confident, more brutal. It's scary to think about, but it makes sense.
So we could be talking about someone who spent years refining this horrifying skill set, figuring out how to lure, capture, and kill.
It's just awful to think about.
It is. And he didn't even just use brute force, right? He was known to fake injuries, playing on people's compassion to get them to help him.
He weaponized kindness, seriously messed up.
And on top of that, he went back to crime scenes, kept souvenirs. It's like it went beyond just wanting to kill.
Right. That points to a whole other level of disturbance, a real fascination with death, control, even after the victims were gone.
Which I guess is where the necrophilia comes in.
Yeah.
Documented fascination with death, needing to have that control even after death.
Yeah, you see that pattern in a lot of serial killer cases. It's like a disconnect from that basic human instinct to, recoil from death. Instead, this fascination with having ultimate power.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the external stuff, things that maybe shaped Bundy.
Right.
But let's shift gears. Let's look at how he tried to justify what he did. The paper analyzing his words is really helpful here.
Yeah, it's like peeking behind the mask he wore, seeing how he rationalized it all, minimized the horror.
Exactly. He used terms like aberration and exception to the rule to talk about torture. Like it was nothing.
Classic minimization, right.
Yeah.
Downplaying it all. And another thing, did you notice how he almost never said rape?
Oh,
It was always sexual encounter or something vague like that.
he even compared himself to soldiers at war. Like they're both just killing an image so dehumanizing.
Absolutely. Denying the humanity of his victims to detach from the consequences, it's chilling.
Okay, but this is where things get complicated. One of the sources analyzes Bundy through rational choice theory.
Oh, interesting.
Like, did he actually weigh the costs and benefits? I mean, he was meticulous, planned things out, tried to avoid getting caught.
He definitely had some of those rational decision-making traits. But
Oh.
then there's what Bundy called the entity.
Oh, right, right.
This separate force inside him making him do it. Does that fit with rational choice?
Yeah, it's almost like he's saying he wasn't in control. But then he also blames porn, violent media, even says society created him. So which is it? Him? Or forces outside of him?
Million-dollar question. And that's what we'll keep exploring as we dig deeper.
All right, so we've covered Bundy's seemingly normal upbringing, his descent into violence, his attempts to justify it all, but we're just getting started.
There's a lot more to unpack here for sure.
Absolutely. Buckle up, because we're going even deeper into the mind of Ted Bundy. It's weird, right? This entity thing Bundy kept talking about.
Yeah, it's like he wanted to acknowledge how awful it all was, but then also shift the blame.
Like distance himself from the actual doing of it.
A real psychological puzzle. And it gets even more complex when you see how his explanations changed over time.
Oh, really?
Like, early on, the entity was this vague, almost mystical force, but later it becomes an addiction.
An addiction to killing.
He even uses that language. Cravings. Needing more and more extreme experiences to get the same feeling.
Wow. There's this quote from his final interview. It stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
He said, once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, you look for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. It's like he knew it was escalating.
It's chilling because he's describing this descent into darkness. Each step makes it harder to turn back. The obsession just grows.
And he says, pornography can reach in and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home 20 or 30 years ago. So now it's not just the entity, right?
Right.
It's porn, media, society, all part of his excuse.
Classic blame shifting. But does that let him off the hook completely? That's the question.
I mean, the world does shape us, doesn't it? But why do some people cross that line and others don't? There's got to be choice involved.
Absolutely. Personal responsibility. You can't just be a product of your environment. There's more to it.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where this rational choice theory hits a snag.
With Bundy, you mean?
Yeah. If it was all rational choices, why even invent the entity at all? Why not just own it?
I guess it shows how messed up he was on the inside. Like, he needed to make sense of it himself, even as he tried to explain it away.
Trying to separate himself from the monster, even while describing the monster's acts.
Okay, let's talk about the victims for a minute. Almost all young women, attractive students, many of them look like his ex, Diane Edwards. What's that tell us?
It points to fantasy, obsession, this idealized woman he was trying to, recapture, control. And when that control slipped, like it always does in real life, violence.
It's terrifying to think someone's inability to deal with loss could turn into that.
And we can't forget, Bundy's victims were real people. They had lives, families who were destroyed by this. It's easy to focus on Bundy himself, the puzzle of it all, but the human cost is huge.
Absolutely. There's a quote from that Biography.com article that I thought was interesting. It says, Bundy's crimes were more about power and control than sexual gratification.
It's an important distinction. But there's a sexual element, sure, but it wasn't just that. It was about dominating, extinguishing their lives. The killing itself was the ultimate power move.
And that ties back into the necrophilia, going back to the scenes, the souvenirs, all about extending that control.
Exactly. A level of depravity that's really hard to wrap your head around. It reminds us we're dealing with someone whose mind just doesn't work like most people.
Okay, this is a bit uncomfortable, but I think we need to talk about it.
Go on.
In a lot of interviews, Bundy tried to frame his crimes as like a symptom of society being sick. He talked about how women are objectified in the media, advertising, like he was just a product of that.
It's a dangerous argument for sure, trying to shift the blame, saying, you made me this way.
But even though what he did was horrific, is there any truth to that?
Yeah.
Like, we do live in a world obsessed with this idealized female beauty. Does that have an effect?
It's complicated. It's a bigger conversation than we have time for here. But we have to acknowledge that societal stuff might contribute, but it never excuses violence.
So we're back to personal responsibility again. Even in a messed up world, we choose how to act.
Exactly. That's the biggest lesson here, maybe. We can't just point fingers at the outside and say, that's why. We have to look inside ourselves, too.
Okay, so we've talked about Bundy's early life, the psychology of his crimes, how he tried to justify it all, the role of society. But there's one more thing I want to explore. So we talked about Bundy trying to explain it all away, right?
The entity, the addiction, blaming society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's this quote from that paper analyzing his language.
Oh, right. The academic one.
It said, Bundy's justificatory discourse reveals a profound struggle between acknowledging the horror of his actions and desperately seeking to distance himself from the perpetrator. It's like he knew it was bad but couldn't face it.
Like trying to reconcile the monster he became with the normal guy he pretended to be.
He even said at one point, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but being possessed by something so awful and alien, it's intense, right?
Trying to find the words for that level of darkness. But even then, there's still that evasiveness, not fully owning it.
It brings us back to that big question we started with, Can we ever really understand a mind like that? After all this, the sources, the evidence, the psychology, I don't.
Maybe that's the scariest part. Even with all the info, all the analysis, there's still this mystery, this darkness we can't fully grasp.
It's like peeking through a cracked window. You see these flashes of something awful, but you never get the whole picture.
And that's the danger, trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense. The taking of a human life, it's fundamentally irrational.
So where does that leave us? If we can't fully get the why, what's the point of all this? What can we learn?
Maybe understanding isn't always about answers. Maybe it's about knowing what we don't know, accepting that some things just defy explanation.
Sitting with that discomfort, the darkness, not looking away.
Exactly. And maybe by doing that, by looking at the worst of humanity, we get better at seeing the warning signs.
Like the little things that might mean someone's going down a bad path.
A deeper understanding of the human psyche, the potential for good and evil in all of us.
And that awareness, that's going to be the best tool we have to stop these things from happening again.
Absolutely.
So we've come to the end of our deep dive into Ted Bundy. I'm left feeling uneasy, for sure. Yeah. But also, like, we have to learn from this. Use it to shed light on the darkness, to work towards a world where these kinds of things are less likely to happen.
It's a tough journey, but it's important.
It is. Keep those brains working, folks. Stay curious. And until next time, keep diving deep.